I will now call on Ms. Connie Dupre Gaines to come and give us the history of Terrebonne, a short history of Terrebonne Parish, and then a short history of the Terrebonne Genealogical Society. Connie is a native and lifelong resident of Terrebonne Parish, and she currently serves as the Vice President of the Terrebonne Genealogical Society and has held several other positions on the Executive Board of TGS through the years. She is employed as the Director of Administrative Services for the Cardiovascular Institute of the South and is based here out of their Houma office. Besides her professional memberships, Connie holds memberships and executive positions with several different organizations, some of which are the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Daughters of the War of 1812, the Continental Society of Indian Wars, the Order of Native Americans and Friends, and the United Houma Nation. So I welcome Connie to come and share with us the history of Terrebonne Parish and TGS.
Good morning and welcome to our People and Culture Day as we continue to celebrate Terrebonne's 200th anniversary. Wow, we'd be really old. My name is Connie Gaines, and I am the Vice President of the Terrebonne Genealogical Society, and our society is sponsoring this event today. This year is the 40th anniversary of our organization. In the early 1970s, a small group was formed with others interested in their family history. Initially, the group met at night in the homes of various individuals. They gathered to share experiences, ideas to solve problems, and exchange publications. Additional meetings were organized at the East and the North Branch libraries with speakers knowledgeable about genealogy and history. Initially, they had 4 people that attended the meetings, and then the next meeting, they had 8 people. So, a few meetings later, a slate of officers came together, the name Terrebonne Genealogical Society was formed, and they created and printed a journal named Terrebonne Lifelines. So that was how the Genealogical Society started, and this was sort of the magnet of how they were going to proceed. On July 1st, 1982, charter membership was closed. By the end of that year, the society had close to 500 members. 42 people had enough faith in the society to pay lifetime memberships. The society continued to grow and search for ways to raise money and create interest. In 1983, the first book was published, and it was the 1860 Census of Terrebonne Parish. Countless books have been written and published over the past 40 years, as well as our lifelines. These publications and our monthly meetings continue to strive, grow our membership, and meet our mission to encourage the science of genealogy, help others to gather genealogical information, preserve and publish material of historical and genealogical nature, all for educational purposes. So for 40 years, our society now has 199 members on our current roster. We share a presence of members from 20 states and the District of Columbia. This includes 31 libraries and other societies around the country. We continue to research our past to reveal lineages and extraordinary accomplishments of our family members and members of the tri-parishes. Our ultimate goal is to preserve this information for generations to come. Our presentation today is one of a 12-part series to highlight the important aspects of Terrebonne Parish's history. So moving forward, on April 6, 1822, at the home of Alexander Dupre, a meeting was held to form a police jury for Terrebonne Parish, which now is known as the Terrebonne Parish Consolidated Government. The first 4 resolutions were on the organizing of the Terrebonne Parish Police Jury, appoint a clerk, and form rules and regulations. In 1834, Terrebonne Parish founded the city of Houma in order to establish a centrally located and more easily accessible parish seat. Land was donated by Hubert Belanger and Richard Greenidge. Both of these significant donations, Belanger and Greenidge, are considered the fathers of Houma. The first parish seat was set at Williamsburg, which is now Bayou Cane, approximately 4 miles northwest of present-day downtown Houma. While Williamsburg sat at the junction of two bayous, which were Bayou Cane and Bayou Terrebonne, government officials felt that Houma, which sat at the convergence of 6 bayous, would better serve our area for commerce and development in Terrebonne Parish. Houma was incorporated on March 16, 1848. The parish seat consisted of 5 stores, 12 dwelling houses, a church, a blacksmith shop, a schoolhouse, a hotel, a tavern, a courthouse, including a small jail, a clerk's office, and a sheriff's office, and a recorder's office. And all of this was in one building. Amazing, huh? Isn't that amazing? The first courthouse was built on the land of Alexander Dupre, and who was the person who donated the property. So Houma was named after the Homas Indians. I'm one of those. The Homas Indians originally came from Mississippi. After losing the war to the Tunicas in 1706 and to escape the encroachment of the white people, the Homas Indians moved south to remote areas. They settled in Terrebonne Parish in the mid to late 18th century after their village at Burnside, Louisiana was devastated by a measles epidemic. They established a camp known as Whiskey Bayou, which we've all kind of heard, at the present-day area of downtown Houma. They were subsequently pushed to the coastal regions of southern Terrebonne Parish by the European settlers in the late 1700s and 1800s. The direct descendants of the Homas Indians, as well as other tribes, remain a visible and integral part of the community. One of the most southern of all Louisiana parishes is us, Terrebonne Parish, which covers an area of 2,100 square miles. It is the second largest parish in the state. The early French settlers christened this parish because they must have been impressed with the fertility of the soil and the marshes, so they named it Terrebonne, which means good earth. Most of the pioneers who came to Terrebonne migrated from the Mississippi River down Bayou Lafourche to Terrebonne Bayou. There was an influx of the French from New Orleans to the Bayou country after the Spanish domination in 1762. The district's Spanish commandant granted concessions of title to not more than 630 acres of land each newcomer to come to the Bayou area. That's amazing, 630 acres each. Other pioneers in the area in 1760 included the exiled French colonists known as the Acadians from Nova Scotia. That too, who had roamed the world for 10 years in search of a home because they settled on the banks of the bayous in Terrebonne Parish. In 1848, Houma was incorporated as a city by an act of legislature. By this time, industry in Houma consisted largely of farming plantations, seafood, fur trading, and logging industries. The cultivation of sugarcane was the principal agricultural industry of our parish. In 1851, Terrebonne had 110 plantations with sugar houses. Southdown Plantation was founded in 1858 by the Minor family. According to our Census Bureau of the United States, in 2021, Terrebonne Parish has 108,000 people with around 47,000 households. So despite how our population has grown, the citizens of our parish have maintained their joie de vivre, which is our exuberant enjoyment of life. Our gathering today is a celebration of our cherished legacy known as Terrebonne Parish. Thank you. just leaving it right there.
Thank you, Connie. And she does such an excellent job at public speaking. And she's one of the ladies of the Terrebonne Genealogy Society who is a master at organization. And we are blessed to have several of those, not just one. Some of the ones you see around here today are awesome at organizing things. Thank God. So next, those who know me know that I generally like to just do off-the-cuff chit-chat. But I am trying to be organized and follow a program so we can stay on focus. So I am actually next on the program. And my topic is a cultural gumbo, a gumbo of cultures. Could someone turn the front lights off that knows how? Thank you. And for those who don't know, the lady in the back is Mary Cosper LeBeouf, the main librarian here at the Terrebonne Parish Library, for whom we are very thankful. I think this is good, huh? Can everyone see? Okay.
Still a glare.
Still a glare, so turn it off. Yeah, that's better. For those of you who don't know, the library has played a magnificent role in allowing many of the presentations during the year and going the extra mile to help with research and other things like that. So we really appreciate Miss Mary and her staff for all they've done to help. Thank you, Mary. I'm going to be a little politically incorrect for South Louisiana. I've got Acadian ancestry, so I'm saying it. I bought an Acadian cookbook one year. It was horrible. I'm so glad that when my ancestors came down here, they blended with the other cultures who came down here as well, because now we have a much better cuisine than we would have had. I would probably weigh 110 pounds if I lived in old-fashioned Acadia, because their food looked horrible in that recipe book, I'm telling you. So I don't want to badmouth my ancestors from Acadia, but they learned a lot by moving to the bayous and blending with other cultures. So let's see where I am. This is, oh, wait, let me go back. And of course, this is through the Terrebonne Parish government, sponsored the entire years of events with Parish President Gordon Dove and the Terrebonne 200 Committee. Chris Pulaski is the chair. And then myself and Margie Scobie are the co-chairs of this committee. And then today's hosts are the Terrebonne Genealogical Society, Bayou History Center, of which I'm the executive director. We're an online genealogy and historical research resource, and the Finding Our Roots African American Museum, and of course the Terrebonne Parish Library. And we're a cultural gumbo. Everyone who's had gumbo knows that once the flavors marry, you get a much better tasting product. You have to get different things in, and they have to blend to where you bring out the flavors, the best flavors of each. Gumbo is the actual official cuisine of the state of Louisiana. Not many places in the United States have their own official cuisine, but in Louisiana, we do. If you mention gumbo to anybody in or actually out of Louisiana, the first thing they're going to think is Louisiana. It's well known, associated with our area. And what is gumbo? It's a thick soup or stew. It originated here in the early 18th century. It consists of strongly flavored stock, meat or shellfish, seasoning vegetables like the trilogy, onion, bell pepper, celery, and some sort of thickener. Now, is there only one recipe for gumbo? Absolutely not. There are as many recipes for gumbo as there are cooks cooking gumbo. It's considered an art form, and it's often used as a standard setter for cooks and restaurants. I know personally, I like to, when I go to a restaurant, order a little bowl of gumbo so I can compare it to everybody else's gumbo. Some are better than others. And we even have weather events defined by gumbo. When you say gumbo weather, this is gumbo weather in Louisiana, most people who are from Louisiana know exactly what you mean. Cold and damp. We're going to have gumbo served to us at lunchtime, because usually this library is freezing cold. Sadly, we flipped a circuit breaker last night, and we came in this morning, it was hot. Usually we have to wear coats for our meetings. But it's getting colder. They've managed to fix the problem. So hopefully by lunchtime it might be a little gumbo weather. The beauty of gumbo is that it cuts across ethnic and socioeconomic levels and marries the flavors of the region's natural resources into a perfect union of gastronomical delight. But who invented gumbo? Well, some people say it was introduced by African slaves who brought okra to Louisiana. Okra is one of the 3 typical types of thickeners used in gumbo. The word gumbo derives, some people feel, the word gumbo derives from the African Bantu word for okra, which is ki na gumbo. And of course, you got to know how to cook okra to get it right, because otherwise you get a slimy mess. So you got to be a little experienced. Some people say gumbo was introduced by the Native Americans in the region who used filet, which is ground sassafras leaves, as their thickener. The Choctaw word for filet is combo. So there's 2 different theories on exactly how it got started. A third theory is that a thickener called a roux, which is the basis for the French dish bouillabaisse. Some feel this points to a direct relationship in the creation of gumbo by the French and Acadian settlers in the colony. And frankly, I've tasted all 3 different types of gumbo with thickeners. They're pretty cool too. The word gumbo can also be used as a metaphor for the mix of ethnic groups who settled in the region and blended together to form the Louisiana culture and cuisine we know today. Each added not only specific types of food, but also methods of collecting and cooking food when they came to Louisiana. Everybody brought something to the pot. Native Americans introduced the new settlers coming to corn and bread, cornbread, grits, sweet potatoes, squash, beans, and how to get the abundant wildlife of the region. Look at the picture on the far right, an alligator. Now it looks good on swamp people when they say, shoot them, and they shoot them right there in that little hole in the head right there to kill the alligator. But in the old days, you had to know how to kill an alligator really good when you didn't have all the sophisticated tools and weapons you have today. Can you imagine the Native Americans trying to kill an alligator? How hard that must have been. So knowing when to get food, the natural resources, and where to get it and how to get it were skills that had to be learned and then had to be taught. So people helped each other in sharing their knowledge and skills. With the settlement of New Orleans in 1718, the French settlers introduced in their famous sauces, their sweets, and their breads. I'm going to be a little gross right here, but you know why the French loved all these sauces that they created early on? There was no refrigeration. So they used old meats. They kept meat for as long as they could. So they had to cover up some things. The best way to cover up the things was to make a nice sauce over it so you couldn't see what you were really eating. I learned that in college. One of the few things. But anyhow. Africans contributed okra, yams, peanuts, watermelon, collard greens, hot peppers, and pepper sauce. Africans also introduced the concept of deep fat frying to the region. And of course, those many Africans who settled in the Caribbean, as the Caribbean people started to come into this area, they also contributed rice and bean dishes, as well as numerous spices and fruits, sometimes more exotic, sometimes more tropical. All became part of our cuisine, part of what we learned to eat and how to eat, and put into our menus. The Caribbean settlers, y'all come on in, it's fine. The Caribbean settlers also introduced the technique of barbecuing. And this is a very early drawing of people barbecuing. Notice the pit in the ground, making the fire, and then roasting on branches above. When the Germans arrived, they brought with them techniques for processing meats and brown mustard, which, as anybody who cooks knows, when you start dealing with mustard, you're going to develop some serious flavors. And the Germans also had great knowledge of vegetables, growing root vegetables. That's why when you work along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, where the soil was so fertile from the Mississippi River, you have all these fabulous truck farms that fed the colony. Wherever you had rich soil, people could grow vegetables that was used to help feed the colony. Spain brought in the Canary Islanders, the Isleños, who contributed their love of spicy foods, including cayenne pepper. The Isleños were primarily fishermen who soon began supplying large amounts of shrimp, crab, and oysters to the food markets in New Orleans. And that's why you still see a lot of the Isleños families and descendants living closer to the coast. My Domingue ancestor, my mother was a Domingue, which was Dominguez, that's Isleño. And they lived down as close to the coast. My grandpa was a fisher and a trapper. And of course, all these delicacies were very important to the cuisine of the area. The Acadians ended their exile when they came here, but they were very, like I said, their cookbook shows they weren't really good at cooking. But they were very proficient in farming, in hunting, and in fishing. They knew how to build levees and how to reclaim wetlands to build soil that they could use for planting. But even more than the technological and engineering part of that, they knew how to organize into groups. They knew how to use each other as friends and family and community. They developed bonds and practices that promoted economic self-sufficiency and group solidarity. They also designed and built boats and vessels to navigate the shallow wetlands of their new homeland. Croatians, Eastern European people, helped develop the oyster industry in Louisiana. And they still play a prominent role in that industry today. That's why if you go down towards Barataria and St. Bernard, you're going to find people whose last name ends in ITCH, Satojevic, Satanovic, and things like that. People that we don't traditionally recognize as being Louisiana. But they've been here for a very long time and have contributed so much to our culture and our cuisine. Italians helped to develop a food distribution system that enabled the colony to survive and to thrive. They were famous for their fig pastries and casseroles and cookies and cakes and pasta. This food distribution, they'd bring things from the truck farms to the French market in New Orleans. That's actually how Saya got started, is maneuvering things from the bayous to the French market. In fact, my daddy always told the story that when they were living in New Orleans, him and my mom, when they first got married, you know, nobody really had cars and stuff to travel. And Daddy was still working in New Orleans. Mama came to home and gave birth to her first child, who did not sadly live very long. But Daddy would have to go back to New Orleans, and he'd hitch a ride with one of Mr. Sawyer's seafood trucks, little trucks that they carried seafood from the bayou to the French market. And he said he'd get to work that way. He didn't smell too good by the time he got there, but that's how he would get to work. He'd hitch a ride. So the transportation of these products was critical as well, and Italians played a big role in those types developing of the economy growing. And of course, the Asian settlers helped to establish the dried shrimp industry in Louisiana. They also taught the other residents how to elevate structures and avoid floodwaters. So you look, there used to be a place called Manila Village, which technically wasn't in Terrebonne Parish, it was near Grand Isle. But it was all in that area where some of the earliest Filipino-American settlements in America. The Filipinos were very critical to the early development and survival of the colonies in the colonists in Louisiana. There are new settlers who still arrive in Louisiana today, and they each add new things and bring their own unique, special, and fascinating ideas and foods to the unique, special, fascinating place that is Louisiana. For instance, now we have fish tacos. I know a lot of people who love fish tacos. You put a Louisiana flair on it and you have a taco. But these are new things that new people coming in are developing into our culture. Bayou living is a blending of the geography, where your area is, the people who settle there, the environment. What are you going to eat? What's around you, the fresh stuff around you. The natural resources, the governance, what is allowed, what can you hunt at what time of year. The commerce, how do you get it from one place to another. The religion, okay? At one time it was against the law to be anything but Catholic in Louisiana. So when you said you couldn't eat meat on Friday, nobody sold meat on Friday because it was against the law. So it was a question of these impacted our food choices, our cuisine, the language. Chic de femme. We have things today that we recognize here, but if you go anywhere else in the country, they're going to look at you like you're crazy. They don't know what you're talking about. All of these things help to develop a culture that's blended, that's tasteful, that's unique and special. Remember, when you look at the Mississippi River watershed, the Mississippi River is the third largest river in the world. It's, of course, the largest on the North American continent. We're at the bottom of the watershed. So every time water flows through any of these 32 United States and 3 Canadian provinces, it's going to come down in Louisiana, which is why we have the fabulous estuaries that we have here, that you don't find in other places. But it gives us a unique culture because we have to build near the waterways. Why? Because that's where the high land is, near the waterways. When you look for your settlers, their communities are going to be in a line on the levee next to the waterway. If you go to Ohio or Kansas or one of these other places, communities are going to be away from the waterways because the waterways, where it floods, is the lowland. In a delta, the waterway is the highland. The water builds the land. The Mississippi River was the birth canal that gave birth to the state of Louisiana and to the parish of Terrebonne. And that what's brought the unique DNA of all these other places down to our area and made us develop into the communities that we are today. They were an avenue for trade. The Native Americans knew that and did wonderful trade back and forth all along all of the different waterways, how to get through it. And then, of course, at one time, you only could use the waterways. The land was so low and unclear. Can you imagine our ancestors who first came here? They had to use the waterways. There were no roads. There really were no serious roads in this part of the world until Huey Long in the 1930s. There were trails and old Indian trails, but mostly everything was near the waterway or on the waterway. We had agriculture because of the fertile soil that came from all these other places on the continent. We grew all kinds of things. One of the early crops was indigo, which we now know is deadly poison. But it has a beautiful color. But we have lots of things that grow here. But that led to the cuisine and the blending of our culture because we had things that we could use that nobody else could. And I always get a kick watching the Food Channel when they have a thing and they'll show like a porta potty, you know, like they put on the street corner, and they say, "This is a pecan." Then they show a picture like on the bottom right, said, "This is a pecan." So there's, you know, we call it different things and how you pronounce it. But of course, moss picking. Most people don't realize the moss was actually a big industry at one time. In fact, Henry Ford, when he built his first cars, used moss for the seats, to stuff the seats of his cars. So there's still a very boutique market for moss, but it's not very large now. But we had the seafood industry, all different kinds of seafood, and still today is a large industry in Louisiana. Forestry, good and bad. It was fabulous when it was fabulous. Sadly, it helped to destroy what's going on in our cypress forest and is part of the problem in what's happening here today. You notice the bird is the Carolina parakeet. That was instrumental in growing the large cypress forests that were here because it had a beak that could break open the seed of the big cypress trees. But one of the faults of the Carolina parakeet is that it's very oriented to its kinfolk, its brethren, its fellow birds, to where if one bird got injured or shot down, the rest would go stand around it to protect it on the ground, making them easy targets for everybody to shoot those two. And they ended up dying out. They're extinct now. And that played a major role in the deforestation of the cypress forests in Louisiana. You've got the maritime industry. It's still being used big in Louisiana because what do we have? Water. We have lots of water. Tourism, very big. People want to know who we are. They like who we are. They don't understand us a lot of times, but they're interested and curious about who we are and what we eat and what we call things and stuff like that. And our accents give us away. I talk about the story of my dad when he was in the war. He got injured and was left behind to have surgery, and they said, "Catch up with us when you can. We've got to keep going." And he did catch up with his platoon eventually. And of course, they had to have a word of the day, a password of the day to get back with your group. And they said, "Halt, who goes there?" And of course, my daddy had been out, you know. He says, "I don't know the password." "What's the password?" "I don't know, I don't know, I don't know." And they were going to shoot him because they thought maybe he might have been an enemy trying to disguise, you know, to get into the place. And one gentleman came up and said, "Hold on, soldier, where you from?" Daddy said, "I'm from Houma, Louisiana." The guy said, "Yeah, let him through. He's telling the truth." He said, "You can't make up that accent." That's a story my daddy himself told me, so it's a true story. But that's what saved his life, that little Cajun accent. And he didn't really have a big, like, I don't think I have a Cajun accent, but everybody tells me I do. But he didn't have a Cajun accent, but enough to save his life, I guess. So it's like a passport telling you, okay, you from Louisiana. And of course, we have the petrochemical industry. So industries have changed through the years in Louisiana, all providing support and growth for our communities. We're strong gumbo, we've blended together, and we continue to blend together, and we need to continue to stay strong. So there we go with that one. Okay, now what I want to do is introduce some special people to you. Thank you, Mary. To the back is Mr. Jess Bergeron, who is a member of our board of directors, longtime former president. Jess is our librarian, and you'll notice all the books against the back wall. Terrebonne Genealogical Society, besides our journal called Terrebonne Lifelines, where we've been publishing data from the courthouse, sales, mortgages, census records, church records, school records, family records for 40 years, called Terrebonne Lifelines. We also have published major books on various topics of importance to researchers in this area to protect our history. One of the things we know is that with climate change and with the loss of our coast, which is dramatic, our history is in danger. Our records are in danger. The best way to protect our history, our records, our heritage, our data related to our heritage is to publish it. Put it out there for the world to keep a record of. Our stuff goes to the Library of Congress. We want as many people to have access to information about this area as possible, instead of leaving it in someone's grandma's attic to either be eaten by roaches, or as, like I tell the society in my case, I've been doing genealogy for 20 plus years. I have a library at my house, and I have lots of filing cabinets, and thank God my son AJ decided to be an independent adult, moved on his own, because now his room has also become my second library for genealogy. But my 3 sons hate genealogy. My 2 older sons, not AJ. AJ does well with mama, right? Yeah. My 2 older sons tell me, Ma, when you die, when we leave the funeral, we burning your house down. We're not cleaning out all that trash. Luckily, my brother Philip here also does genealogy, and he tells me, don't worry, Patty, I'm leaving before the funeral's over, and I'm going to protect your house. But the best way to protect all this work I've done for all these years is to share it. And the Terrebonne Genealogical Society believes in sharing, passing that information for as many people to share as possible. I know many of us find where we say, oh, Great Aunt Ruth got all of Grandma's pictures, but she doesn't want to share with anybody. She says they're hers. Nothing makes me madder than that. It's like, with today's technology, keep the picture. Let me bring a scanner to your house. I'll scan it. You keep your picture, put the dust in it, let the roaches eat it, whatever you want. Give me a digital copy, and we're good to go. Share, share, share. And you see here today is Mr. Clifton Terrio. Raise your hand, Cliff. Cliff is the archivist at the Nicholls State University Archives. And they are one of the major protectors of historical collections in this area. So anytime people have important historical information that's related, that helps preserve the heritage of this community, we strongly encourage them to work with local archives to share. You also see, you'll meet Jason Villela later, Jason, who is now employed at the Diocese Archives in Thibodaux, the Diocese of Houma Thibodaux. So, and he'll talk about that a little later. So we encourage people to share as much as possible. But Jess, check out all of the books that he has in the back. He's excellent, has been for years, bringing these things in boxes to every meeting we have. I don't know what we're going to do when Jess decides to eventually get old. As long as he's young, we're good. But if he ever gets old, we're in trouble. Also, I want to introduce to you Susan Cairo Dupre, who is standing at the back door in her Acadian garb. And thank you, Susan, and her family from Cairo Cakes has donated the 2 cakes that we're going to enjoy today for our dessert. But, Ella, would you grab that book? Susan very graciously volunteered this year for Terrebonne 200. Yeah, want to hold it up? Don't you love sisters? Especially when they make you do stupid stuff. She loves me. This is my sister Ella. Susan graciously volunteered to chair the team of people who put together a historical cookbook with historical recipes from Terrebonne Parish families. And it's in celebration of the 200th, but she got people to distribute, to send in histories of their families, histories of Grandma and Grandma's recipes, and we put them together in a cookbook. These are available for purchase. See Miss Susan sometime during the day, and you can either buy, or Jess, you can buy it today or order one. And actually my mother is in there, one of my mother's recipes in a little store. Yes, she's in there. You didn't know that, did you?
I thought she was at Holy River Cemetery.
No, she's at the cemetery, but her history's in there. She gonna haunt you, girl. She gonna haunt you. But thank you. Thank you. That's why I put you in front of me. So watch, she gonna leave now because I made her do something. Bye. Love you. I also want to introduce Wanda Fitchmore. Miss Wanda, would you be so kind? Wanda doesn't do anything. She's just a lazy bum. She stays home doing nothing. She hangs out. I'm joking, of course. Wanda has one of the hardest jobs in the Terrebonne Genealogical Society. She is the editor of our Terrebonne Lifelines journal. So she's the one who puts all these lovely data books together. And we thank her very much for the hard work that she does in doing this. It is a lot of work. So, but one of the things that Wanda is hoping for today is that you guys can get motivated to say, I want my family's tree to be published in Terrebonne Lifelines. It won't cost you anything. She'll work with you to make it happen. If you put together your family tree, get it to Wanda, contact her while you're here, get her how to contact her, and she will see about getting it published, and that way it will be preserved for history. It will go wherever our journal goes. And our journal goes to many major libraries around the country. So please, if you know a subject that you're very good at, for instance, if you know anything about pirogue building or anything like that, and want to submit an article on it, please do so. We want your work. We want you to talk with Wanda today. If you have your grandma's pictures, and a story about grandma or grandpa, or remembrance of when you used to go to their house when you were little, send it to Wanda. We'll publish it for you. You don't get paid anything, by the way, but you do get to preserve your family's history. So I wanted to make sure that to introduce you people to Wanda, so you know, and Wanda does, you know, she's a wife, a mama, a grandma, and she works for one of the churches, and she's also in the United Home of Nation, and she does all of this stuff, and so she's a very busy woman. But as they always say, if you want something done, ask a busy woman. So ask away. We want to share you. We want to share your stories. It's very, very important. If you have stories that connect to Terrebonne Parish, even if you're from somewhere else, we want to know them. So would all the board members come here, and we want to thank these guys for such a great job. They have really stepped up to the plate. And we'll let Verna take their picture. Thank you. And these people go out of their way to volunteer for things, and we really appreciate their dedication. If you're a member and have come in costume, or anybody who has come in costume, please line up, and we're going to have a small parade of costumes. And then we'll ask each of the persons in costume to give a short explanation of what their costume represents.
Hi, I'm Steve Estopanol, and I'm a sergeant in the Louisiana Spanish Regiment, which was here from 1763 to 1803. We were garrisoned here in Louisiana. An interesting fact is the Spanish Regiment wasn't full of Spaniards. So people are confused about that. They were soldiers for Spain, but they recruited locally. And so there were a lot of people from the local area in the Spanish Regiment, along with a lot of Spaniards as well. And I'm a sergeant. And after this little shindig is over, if you visit my booth over there, I've got a bunch of books that tell that story about the Spanish in Louisiana. Thank you.
And Stephen will be presenting this afternoon, and his books are awesome. Miss Susan, and if you get a little closer, I'll hold this one for you. But we need both of them. One is for the recorder, and one is for the room.
Bonjour. This way? Okay. My name's Susan Caro Dupre, and I am an Acadian dressed girl from Nova Scotia. The white slip that's completely underneath this outfit is called a chemise, and the Acadian women use that to work around their homes, and they wore their aprons in the kitchen, and then if they went out into the city or if they wanted to dress up a little bit, then they wore the bow dice.
Thank you, Susan. And thanks for your work on the awesome cookbook. I tell you what, why don't we come on this side over here? And that way I'll hold this by your mouth here, and you can hold that.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dale Bro, and ditto what she said.
Cajun lady, Cajun lady.
But I do want to tell you that I know that the Cajun women, Acadian women, have had to make their own cloth and had to make their own clothes. And they were a little bit sicker than this. And with the air conditioner out earlier, I would have never made it. Because I'm wearing something very thin today, although it's very comfortable. Learning from my mom, who's 90, whose mother-in-law dressed like this even in the 50s. I still didn't know how she did it because she worked all day and she baked bread every day and she milked a cow, and I had trouble going to the bathroom with this, so that's it.
Yeah. We never think of those details when we're talking period dress.
So my name's Jason Thomas Balalo. I'm dressed in more of a Southern gentleman look that can really actually go into the businessman look as well. I like to think more of the Sicilian type myself with my heritage. That's it.
Thank you.
Wanda Fitch Moore. I'm from the Houma United Nation. We've been here from the 1700s till today. Our tribe is kind of dwindling a little bit because we don't accept new members, but we are here, and I'm representing our tribe.
My name is Marcy Landry Cavalier, and I'm a sweet little Cajun girl. I've been here for a long, long time, but I don't look it, huh? Well, thank you. That's it.
And she is an extremely sweet lady.
Okay, you tell me like him. This one not talk.
This one doesn't talk unless she tells us what to do. This is Sandra Boudreau Clément. And she's a country lady. 1880s, in a prairie style, she likes to say. And one of the hardworking ladies who make the world go around. The ladies who get things done.
And I met you earlier this morning. My name is Connie Gaines. I'm the Vice President of the Genealogical Society, and I am true antebellum, 1840 to 1860. And I have pantaloons on underneath, but you can't see them. And I have a slip and a hoop and a bustle and all sorts of things and big hats and parasols that I didn't bring today because I'm inside, so I didn't think I needed all of that. But I love dressing up for reenactments, and that's it. I just love dressing up. I was supposed to be 1920 flapper today. Next week I'll be something different, and I'll be an Indian colonial in November. So I think it's a great way to share our heritage in dress. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all very much for coming dressed in costume. Our next presenter is Dr. John Ducey. Dr. John P. Ducey was awarded a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology from the LSU Medical Center in New Orleans in 1992 and received the Chancellor's Award. While a member of the department, he delivered lectures in medical, dental, nursing, and graduate biochemistry courses. Following the doctorate, he was a two-time National Institutes of Health Research Fellow in molecular neurobiology and in molecular genetics. Wow, I can't even say some of this stuff. He subsequently joined the faculty at the Department of Biological Sciences at Nicholls State University in Thibodaux, where he taught endocrinology, genetics, and genomics, and established molecular genetics section. From this vantage at the Geographic Center of Acadiana, he is a frequent speaker on genetics issues to organizations across the state. Dr. Ducey is active in administration of the American Society of Human Genetics, has served 2 terms on the Outreach and Education Committee, and is currently serving on the Public Education and Awareness Committee. Dr. Ducey's major area of interest is the genetic anthropology and genomic basis of genetic traits in Louisiana populations, particularly the Acadian, which is its ancestry. With his students in the University Honors Program, he has established a forensic pharmacology initiative assessing safety and usefulness of products used at dispensaries and infirmaries in historical villages of southeastern Louisiana. He is the Dean of the College of Sciences and Technology and a McElhenney Professor of Human and Environmental Genetics at Nicholls State University. And we welcome Dr. John Ducey.
Well, thank you everyone for having me. Thank you, Patty, for inviting me. And I hope to tell you some information that you may not have known about our ancestors in the Acadian world with this presentation. Can everybody hear me well? Well enough? No? What's that? Yeah, I know I hate to hold mics, but that's okay. I'll do it. I'll do it for you. How about that? Okay, I love to show this photograph because it tells a number of things. This is the historical marker that many of you may be familiar with. It's located at the Jean Lafitte National Park in Thibodaux at the Wetlands Acadian Cultural Center, and it says a couple of things. It says the Acadians were settled in this area in 1785 and were joined by other cultures, French, German, Spanish, and American settlers. It also tells us something else. It tells us that near here was the prehistoric fork of the 2 bayous that created our parishes and our communities. And that's where I like to start my presentation. So if you take a look at this map, and I love maps, this is a satellite image of Louisiana. I know a number of you know that the southernmost part of Louisiana was built by settlements being deposited by the Mississippi River. If you look closely, we've built all of our communities and we own all of our land on the natural levees of the Mississippi River, Bayou Lafourche, and Bayou Terrebonne. That separates the swampland from all these linear villages. However, what you may not know is that none of Louisiana was here 300 million years ago. None of us were here either, so you got to believe me. Nonetheless, when the continents were grinding across themselves and trying to separate to create the continents we know today, there was a huge cleft in the North American plate where Louisiana belongs. You can see a little peninsula that became Florida, but basically, Louisiana didn't exist. All the rivers were flowing north to south and started depositing settlements to fill in the Gulf coastline, and the entirety of Louisiana came from that deposit. More recently, about 3,000 years ago, Lafourche Parish and Terrebonne Parish were created when the Mississippi River decided to start changing its delta formation from the west to St. Bernard in the east, and finally, beginning about 3,000 years ago, toward Bayou Lafourche, and ultimately Bayou Terrebonne. Spanish explorers in the 1500s that were surveying this coast reported that fresh water, drinkable water, was coming from both the area of Plaquemines Parish near the current delta of the Mississippi River and from Bayou Lafourche. So many of us think about Bayou Lafourche being a prehistoric Mississippi River. It's probably a prehistoric branch of the Mississippi River that was flowing at the same time the Mississippi was flowing in Plaquemines Parish. And even more recently, about 325 years ago, this guy, Iberville, noted that, hey, gardons ça, les crevasses. So he noticed a levee break, or he noticed a branch of the Mississippi River right around present-day Donaldsonville, and he called that the Fork, or Bayou Lafourche. And about 267 years ago, we all know what happened. This is the only known contemporaneous representation of what happened in 1785 when the Acadians were exiled. This represents the scorched earth policy of burning villages as the settlers were being removed by boats such that they would never again return. Here's another illustration, not contemporaneous, but this is about the Acadian exile, showing the burning churches in the back room and the masses of people being boarded onto ships. So we know that story. We also know the story that the Acadians were settled all across the Atlantic seaboard. The majority of those Acadians that were settled on the North American seaboard ended up in Louisiana between 1764 and 1770. The majority of Acadians that were exiled, however, tried to repatriate themselves. Can you see my arrow? Yeah. Tried to repatriate themselves in the mother country, in France. Some ended up being incarcerated in England. Some ended up directly in France. And those two situations didn't work out very well. For 30 years, these Acadians dwelled on the western coast of France, and entrepreneurs commandeered a number of vessels to take them willingly into the Spanish territory of Louisiana. So in 1785, about 1,500 Acadians left France after 30 years of dwelling and came to Louisiana. And they came to Louisiana right here. Okay? These were the folks that were settled in the Lafourche Basin. So this illustration from one of Carl Brasseau's books shows in the 1760s, the original Acadian settlements, of course we know those well, in the southwest of Louisiana. We know that some of them were settled along the river, and there were some settlements up north in dense Indian country that didn't survive very long. This area, which is currently around St. James and Iberville parishes, was known as the Acadian Coast. everyone who lives in this area, their ancestors were settled after that, after 1785, and they were settled along Bayou Lafourche and a few other areas. So here's the Bayou Lafourche, and these were the previous settlements. So we can compare the two and see how the waterways of southeastern Louisiana and southwestern Louisiana were vitally important in establishing the original Acadian settlements. This table shows you between 1764, when Acadians first started arriving, and between 1770, when there was a big pause in Acadians coming to Louisiana, that the majority of them were settled on the Acadian coast in St. James, across Donaldsonville, and up into Iberville Parish. Why do we call these things the Acadian coast? This is a representation of a painting that's allegedly an image of an Acadian village. We can see a number of homes along the river's edge. The fertile land across the levee was where the majority of agriculture took place. And of course, there's some naval activity in the river. So given the incredible breadth of the river, you can see why they would call these Acadian settlements coasts. But coast has another meaning in French. Côte doesn't just mean coast, it also means a collection of related families. So for instance, the original name of Galliana was called Côte Cherami because the Cheramis used to live there. So when we talk about coast, we might be talking about two separate things. A riverside, or in our case, a bayou-side settlement, and a collection of related families. Both of these meanings apply in the Lafourche Basin. I love this map. I can't remember where I got it. It's clearly the internet, but it shows a couple of things. It shows Bayou Lafourche. It shows Bayou Lafourche from Thibodaux trying to create a delta, which became Terrebonne, the land of Terrebonne Parish. It also shows the German coast of Louisiana and the Acadian coast of Louisiana. So the Acadians were settled beyond or upriver of the Germans. The Germans came from John Law's failed attempt to create a fur industry and a trading post in Mobile, Alabama. Those folks were starving, so they came west into the Florida parishes and they settled along this area. The Acadians were settled between 1764 and 1770, but actually their situation is much more complicated than just calling something the Acadian coast. They were first settled in St. James Parish, and that became such a popular place and a place where families could reunite after the exile that the Spanish government had to open up another area of settlement, and that became the second Acadian coast, which is around current-day Iberville Parish. So those folks were all settled from colonies across the North American Atlantic seaboard before 1770. We really are interested in that large group that came to Louisiana in 1785. And as you all know the story, they came across on 7 chartered ships. These are the famous passenger ships, La Bon Papa, La Caroline. And I don't know if many of you know, but in a nice tip of the hat to our heritage, there's a subdivision in Thibodaux where the streets are named after these ships. That's Jake Jardina's subdivision beyond Nichols. So his streets are named after these ships. My ancestors, by the way, came up across on L'Amitié, the ship which I'm about to show you. There's the L'Amitié. It carried over 200 passengers, 220 passengers, and it landed in, I think, November of 1785. This is the number of folks that were boarded on those passengers. The majority of them were Acadian exiles. These are the areas where they settled. So the majority of folks from Le Bon Papa settled at Manchac. The majority of folks on L'Amitié settled in the Lafourche region. And it's notable that 1, 2, 3, 4, the majority of people on 4 of the 7 ships settled where? Right here in Lafourche and Terrebonne. So it must have been some nice property. Unfortunately, it probably looked like this. And when they signed their Spanish land grants to acquire these strips of property, they were faced with, under threat of impunity, clearing the land and maintaining a 5 to 6 foot levee. So if you didn't clear your land after a certain period of time, and if you didn't maintain your levee, you could lose your land. And some people did. So in 1785, those 7 ships arrived in New Orleans. Actually, one of them arrived in early 1786. And those folks were settled not along the Acadian coast, but right here in Bayou Lafourche, which we now call the last Acadian coast. Why are we calling it the last Acadian coast? If you look at the total of Acadians migrating to Louisiana between the earliest days, 1764, and the end of migration in about 1788, you'll notice that the vast majority of them, 1,600 people, came in one mass settlement from France, and they were settled in the Lafourche Basin. So not only are they the largest mass settlement of Acadian exiles in Louisiana, but they're also, with the exception of this 19, for all intents and purposes, the final Acadian settlement in North America. So our land and our ancestors are kind of special. They are part of what we're now calling the last Acadian coast. You can't find this term in textbooks. We're inventing it today. So raise your hand if you're excited that you're coining a term for the first time. Yes, that's right. Take that, Lafayette. We have a term to refer to ourselves over here in the East. Am I on film? Sorry. But if you take a closer look at this, if you calculate all the people from those ships that ended up in the Lafourche, along Bayou Lafourche and Bayou Terrebonne, that adds up to about 700 folks, okay? If you divide 700 into the total of presumed Acadians that came to Louisiana, people are always talking about Southwest Louisiana and Lafayette as the seat of Acadian culture, but count up the numbers. Over 1/4 of all Acadians settled here. It's actually 28%, nearly 30% of the entire history of Acadian exiles and the Grand Dérèglement. Those settlers didn't go to Lafayette, they came here. We are by far the largest descendant from the largest settlement of Acadians in world history. So if we were to review what we mean by Acadian coasts, the first Acadian coast was settled beginning in 1764. That's currently St. James Parish. A new Acadian coast, because that area was so popular, was established in Iberville Parish. And the last Acadian coast is what we're talking about today. Our ancestors were the final mass settlement of Acadians, the largest mass settlement of Acadians, and if we want to claim another record, it's the largest transatlantic colonization in North America. So we got something to be proud of. Besides the term, we got something to be proud of. I had one of my students map out all of the families from all of the ships and color code them according to ship to show where they were settled. So I have a strip of settlers all along Bayou Lafourche in this image, and in this inset I have settlers along Bayou Terrebonne. I'm going to show you those for a second. So this is the Bayou Terrebonne settlement. These are the ships, and they're color-coded with the names of those folks who settled. Here's Bayou Lafourche, Here's Bayou Terrebonne, and I'm sure you can recognize some of these names because they probably still exist in Terrebonne Parish, right? Chasson, Henry, which that family lived in Acadia but was not French, Boudreaux, Dupree, Nacan, and Berg. I think y'all got a town called Berg, right? Yeah, so. Okay, what happened? Why do we not own those lands any longer, and why did we settle the entirety of our parishes? Well, there are a number of reasons. Number one, the ending of the 1800s, the beginning of the end of the 1700s, the beginning of the 1800s was a time of turmoil economically in North America. Louisiana kept switching between Spain and France and the U.S. The Civil War was approaching. There were stock market crashes, there were economic downturns, and probably the most influential thing was in 1795, 2 seconds before Acadians got here and started farming on their little property that the Spanish government gave them, somebody named Etienne de Boré granulated sugar. So all of a sudden, these small crop farmers with Acadian ancestry had land that was incredibly more valuable to somebody else with a lot of money than it was to them who were trying to eke out a living as a independent farmer. So there's economic depression. There was threat of impunity and loss of land if you didn't maintain your levee, if you didn't clear your property. There was the rise of the plantation culture. The Acadians despised different classes in culture. They hated it in Nova Scotia. They hated it in Louisiana. They couldn't stand the slavery concept, so they moved away from those areas. And probably the historians tell us the most important thing that caused them to move away from the areas is forced heirship. So the second a spouse of a family died, the property was immediately separated between the surviving spouse and all of the children, just like it's done today, except we're probably not farmers. Our land ownership is pretty stable. If you had 40 arpents of land from the Spanish government and a wife died, you're now left with 20. So you have half of the arable property to create a farm and eke out a living. And if you had 10 kids, the other 20 arpents have to be separated amongst the 10 kids. So if you think you can't survive on 20 arpents of land, just think about your children, okay? So unless you had a cooperative farm, those subsequent generations are probably going to be moving farther and farther away from the original Spanish land grants. And that's exactly what happened. Along the way, moving down the bayous, they created these wonderful historical communities that we still know today, sometimes built along the bayous, sometimes built along the canals. This happens to be La Rose. My hometown of Golden Meadow was another one of those created by Acadians. And here you have Dulac and Chauvin and other communities that follow the same pattern. The Acadians followed the bayous all the way to the coast, and about 25% of this, the largest coastal community in Louisiana history, Cheniere-Caminada, which had about 1,500 residents, about 25% of those were Acadian. Cheniere-Caminada is important for this reason. Around the turn of the 20th century, there are a number of great hurricanes that completely changed the settlement pattern of Acadians and others along the bayous. The first of these is the second largest natural disaster in U.S. history. That's the Great Cheniere Hurricane of 1893 that killed 2,000 people, half the population on Cheniere-Caminada, and nearly all of the women and children overnight on October 1st. Then there were the two great Leeville hurricanes, 1909 and 1915, that drew 12 to 15-foot tides across Bayou Lafourche, the end of Bayou Lafourche and the end of Bayou Terrebonne. Those hurricanes together had a dramatic impact in pushing that great population of Cheniere-Caminada and also Leeville up the bayou to form Golden Meadow, Côte Blanche, areas in Terrebonne Parish, and even areas in Jefferson Parish. So if we were to summarize what happened to the Acadians and other folks in this area, we could do this. We had the initial migration in the 1700s of the German Swiss folks from John Law's failed company. Then beginning in 1764, we have the Acadians forming the Acadian coast. And then we have Canary Islanders settling in the upper reaches of Bayou Lafourche. That was 1779, my friends outside tell me. Then we have the Acadians settling in Upper Lafourche in 1785. And the Lafourche and Terrebonne were so beautiful that many of the older Acadian villages, folks there started migrating down to Lafourche Basin. So not only did we have forced airship and economic decline to worry about, we had other Acadians that were leaving their lands and coming live in the Lafourche Basin. So all that forced Acadian descendants down the bayous toward the coast, where at least one great village existed in Cheniere-Caminada. There were other villages. And then those great hurricanes turned people away. And basically, that's the settlement pattern of the Lafourche Basin that includes Acadians and the other folks that were living here. So we can talk about early immigration, sparse immigration of English, Spanish, French, German, even a few Acadians. Then we can talk about the mass settlement of Acadians, Isleños, and with the plantation culture, African Americans that are arriving toward the end of the 1800s. Then we have succession of those populations toward the Gulf, and then what I like to call retrocession from the Gulf. And after those great hurricanes at the turn of the 20th century, our communities became stabilized, and that was the end of the great settlement changes in the Lafourche Basin. And of course, along the way, we developed nice industrial and business-like towns on canals and bayous, and we encountered a couple of industries along the way as well. I'd like to close with a couple of examples of how Acadian populations changed over time and migrated toward the Gulf. This is the passenger list of L'Amitié. This happens to be my ancestors, the first Douces in the Lafourche Basin. That's Jean-Baptiste, the teenager, his younger brother Francois, and their widowed mother, Marie Préchaud. They came together as a unit on L'Amitié. They settled right about there. For some reason, they chose the land farthest away from the other Acadians. Probably not a good idea when you're a single mother with two young sons, but nonetheless, that's where they stayed and survived. And ironically, that original Douce land is right across from Nichols, where I work. I wish I still had that land. Nonetheless, this is a survey of the land that Jean-Baptiste inherited. It's from a later period than 1785. It shows Bayou Lafourche. It shows his original land grant of about 40 arpents on the bayou front. This was all his farm. Until it was separated, he sold some to Nicholas Lane, some to Telesphore Toups, and some to a bourgeois. But that land mechanism, that land architecture, is what gives our bayous that line settlement type of property impression. So these are all the single line settlements of land grants of all the original Acadian settlers. And you can look across the Mississippi River and across all the bayous, and they look exactly the same. So Jean-Baptiste came on the 7 ships, one of the 7 ships to New Orleans, got settled in Lafourche Parish, and he and his son Francois lived there on their Spanish land grants for 2 generations. And the guy pictured there, Joseph Celestin, inherited his money from Francois, his father. He left in the 1840s census, we have him farming in La Rose. In 1850, he's fishing as a living on Cheniere Caminada, and by 1860, he's back farming in Raceland, where he died between 1860 and 1870. His descendants couldn't stand living in Raceland, so Adam Octave and Celestin Joseph and Etienne Doucet and my dad Herman all migrated down the bayou, and then eventually we migrated all the way back up. So that's just one example of how culture changed, occupation changed, and how settlement patterns changed in one family. In closing, I'd like to tell you that the Grand Réveil of Acadian heritage and culture will be held in the first week of October across southern Louisiana. There are events in Abbeville, events in Lafayette, events in other historical Acadian villages, and there's some events in Thibodaux, being the center of that last Acadian coast. It's an expansion of this idea that we coined today together. It's a symposium on Acadian history culture in the Lafourche Terrebonne. That's going to be on Wednesday, October 5th. I know that's a work day, but I'm looking at all of you, and I think you can take the day off to come to Thibodaux to see this, okay? It's going to start at 9 o'clock. It's going to end at 4:30. It's appropriately in the Wetlands Acadian Cultural Center in Thibodaux. It's part of the Jean Lafitte complex. And if you're interested in who's going to be speaking, we have the father of Cajun cinema, Glenn Peet. We have a professor whose research was the unique French spoken in Lafourche and Terrebonne. That's Nathalie Dyko. We have former Nichols professor Don Davis coming to talk about his new book, Seafood Culture and Industry. We have Wendell Curall talking about historical hurricanes and how they shaped settlement. They have me. They have Shina Walton, who's talking about her subsistence culture research in Lafourche and Terrebonne. And our very own Patty Whitney is going to be talking about the history and development of Terrebonne Parish. So once again, that's October 5th at the Jean Lafitte Wetlands Acadian Cultural Center. And it's free, but we encourage you to register. And you can register at this ungodly, unmemorable website name that takes the entire slide to fit. But if you can't remember this, I have some flyers outside on my table that you can take with you, and you won't have to jot this down.
What time it starts in the morning?
9 o'clock. 9 o'clock in the morning. Too early for you? I didn't think so. Okay. And finally, I'd like to thank Nichols, the Center for Bayou Studies, the Nichols Coastal Center, which is currently being built, and my friend Clifton Terrio for getting me that wonderful map that you saw on the opening slide. And I thank you all very much. How's that?
Wonderful. I'm going to put you on the spot. Anybody have questions for Dr. Doucet? You did it all perfectly. They don't even have questions.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
30 minutes on the spot.
On the spot. He did good.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. That's it? Okay.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Dr. John. Wait, Lenore's got a question.
That's a good question.
Want to repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. So she's talking about her descendant. That's our ancestor. You do look very young. Her ancestor, who didn't arrive in 1785 on those mass settlement ships, but stayed because of his youth in continental France, but eventually came here anyway. Over the course of time, and I don't know when he arrived, there would be other ships, even from other countries in European migrations to Louisiana to join families. So he may have come on some random ship after that period of time. My German ancestors, the other side of my family, came in 1850, stowing away on some ship, trying to run away from all the wars in Germany. So that's how my mom's family got here. that's important information for us as a culture, so be important to know. So if you get a chance, let me know what he finds out. Very good, thank you. Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. There you go.
Thank you.
Oh, we need this one. All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And now we're going to get to our next speaker. Stephen Estopinal grew up in the swamps and bayous of St. Bernard and Plaquemines parishes. He's a graduate of Louisiana State University, the class of 1968, a U.S. Army veteran, combat engineers 1969 to 71, and is a retired land surveyor and civil engineer. Mr. Estopinal was a living history volunteer at the Chalmette Battlefield National Park and a black powder expert. His love of history, particularly the history of colonial Louisiana, has prompted him to write a series of novels to bring that history to life. A descendant of Canary Islanders, Isleños, transported to Louisiana by the Spanish during the American Revolution, he draws on extensive research as well as family oral history to tell his stories of colonial Louisiana from a Spanish point of view. Mr. Estopinal began writing books in 1986 when John Wiley and Sons published his textbook, A Guide to Understanding Land Surveys, now in its third edition and required reading at LSU's engineering survey course. His second textbook, Professional Surveyors and Real Property Descriptions, also published by John Wiley, has just been released. Oh, we got to get you come back and tell us how to do how to read land surveys and genealogy. We need that. The first of his novels was El Tigre de Nueva Orleans. Is that kind of right?
That's close enough.
Thank you. Published in 2010 and has been approved for sale by the National Park Service at the Chalmette National Park Visitor Center. It has been followed by a novel nearly every year. Incident at Blood River was published in 2011, Anna in 2012, Escape to New Orleans in 2013, Mobile Must Fall in 2014, Pensacola Burning in 2015, Solitario, Bootlegging on the Bayou in 2018. Now that's going to be my people. The Man from Red Hill in 2018, and Beneath Bonnie Blue Flag in 2021. These novels are all historical fictions of 18th and 19th century. They tell the story of the Isleños settlers in Louisiana and their struggle for survival. Published under the label Libros Isleños of Gonzales, Louisiana, writing historical fiction has provided Stephen Estopinal with an enjoyable hobby and a means of keeping the diverse history of colonial Louisiana alive. I give to you Stephen Estopinal, who is with the Canary Islanders Heritage Society.
Very good. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Let's go through the process of setting up the slides.
Yes, sir.
And if somebody would, kill the Edison.
The lights.
All righty. The Canary Islanders of Louisiana. And of course, if you're all familiar with the Canary Islands, or if you're not, you're about to be, and if I can get this thing to advance. How does it? The bottom one was forward. That's very logical. Okay. And then the upper one is backwards. Okay. All righty. Here's a map showing Spain, Portugal. This is the Mediterranean Sea. This is the Atlantic. This is Africa, Spanish Morocco. You come on down here, and there are the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa. The Canary Islands were one of the first places that Spain conquered because they were interested in having a jumping off point to go to the west. There are 7 islands. The most populated islands are Tenerife and Gran Canaria. Lanzarote, Fuerteventura, La Palma, La Gomera, and El Hierro. Say thank you for pronouncing that almost. That was pretty close. That was pretty close. The majority of Canary Islanders that came to Louisiana came from these 3 islands, though they have large numbers from the others. The transfer of the people to Louisiana was not the first time people came from the Canary Islands to the Americas. There was a place in 1735 where a lot of the people from these two islands, especially Lanzarote, were brought over to the United States, what is now the United States, and they settled in San Antonio, Texas, Bejar, in 1735. So you can see the Canary Islanders have been used by the Spanish government to populate a lot of their areas. They're also recruited heavily for the Army and the Navy from the Canary Islands. I am certain that there was a Canary Islander on the crew for Christopher Columbus, because, first of all, he departed finally from the Canary Islands. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. The bottom is up and the up is down. When the Spanish first came to the Canary Islands, they had the people, they were an indigenous population there. They were called the Guanche. And these are some statues in the Canary Islands of, one was a Guanche princess, and this one is a big king in the Canary Islands when the Spanish came. They lived a Stone Age existence. Now this is 1450, 1490. You could see that they were living in caves and had a Stone Age existence. They didn't have metal tools because there were no ores in the Canary Islands. They had good stones and stuff like that. But also, they really didn't need much because the Canary Islands have the finest climate on the face of this earth. To this day, they don't have heaters or air conditioners in the buildings because it never gets hot enough to need an air conditioner, never gets cold enough to need a heater. It's a very amazing place. I've been there a couple of times, and what amazes me the most was they got me to leave. So, but this is the condition they were in until the Spaniards came from 1402 to 1492. They spent those almost 100 years conquering the islands. The King of Castile was the first one to start contracting conquerors for the islands, and it finally ended with Ferdinand and Isabella, who, when they married, they created the nation of Spain, which, by the way, didn't exist in 1492. There was no Spain. There was Aragon and there was Castile. But that's another story. The indigenous people, this is a painting that was done at the time. This is a contemporary painting. These are chiefs from the Canary Islands meeting Ferdinand and Isabella for the first time. And you'll notice the features of these guys look Celtic almost. Look like they could be from Ireland or Scotland or something like that. Well, an interesting thing in the DNA work, you ever hear of a pH negative? pH negative is a pretty rare blood type. The most pH negative people in the world live in the Basque region of northern Spain, southern France. The second most live in the Canary Islands. And the third, Ireland. Go figure. But to this day, we don't know where the Canary Island indigenous people came from. We suspect they came from the Berbers. The Berbers are a group of people that live in the Atlas Mountains in North Africa. They are not Arabs. You'll notice that even to this day, these are Berber children. Here's a Berber bride. Very beautiful woman. And bloodline and some of the words that the indigenous Guanche used and the Berbers used seems that there was a likelihood of a lot of population. My belief is the people in the Canary Islands were gathered from all kinds of places because it was downwind from everywhere. If you didn't land at the Canary Islands, the next stop was the Yucatan Peninsula. You were out of luck. These are some present-day Canary Islanders, and of course they're in their dancing garb, but you'll notice that it looks like any place in Europe. It could be Spain, it could be France, it could be anywhere as far as the type of people that are involved. All right. When Galvez, the great General Galvez, was recruiting for his army, for the Louisiana Regiment, of which I'm a sergeant, when he was recruiting, one of the things they did was recruit in the Canary Islands because that's where they got a lot of their soldiers from. It was a big island, populations kept growing, there wasn't a lot of places for people to go, so you join the Navy or you join the Army. That was just how it was. And they needed volunteers between the ages of 17 and 36, had to be at least 5.5 inches tall. Now this is a little misleading because that's 5.5 French feet. And a French foot is longer than an English foot. They had a contest, and the Bourbon King says, "Nah, I want my foot to be longer than the English foot." Well, what happens then is when I measure 5.5 feet in French feet, it's really 5 feet 4.5 in English measure. About the same minimum height to this day for people in the Army. It had to be robust without notice. Mulattoes, gypsies, executioners, and butchers could not enlist. Now, executioners and butchers. So in doing my research for some of my novels, I found one letter from the guy that controlled, the governor, I guess you would say in English. The governor of La Gomera was writing to General Galvez's daddy, who was also in charge of all the Canary Islands, saying, "Look, we're having all our tradesmen are leaving and joining the Army. We don't have anybody here to do any of the butchering, and we don't have any executioners." So he says, "Okay, they can't enlist." Enlistment bonus was 90 reals, or 11.25 pesos. Now, a real is the equivalent of 2 reals is a quarter in today's language. 8 reals made up a dollar. So today we say 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits a dollar. That comes from the Spanish division of the dollar. The first American silver dollar was almost a duplicate of the Spanish dollar. And by the way, the Spanish dollar was good legal tender in the United States all the way up until 1835 or something like that. Very interesting. And there it is. And you'll notice that the Spanish dollar, this is the adverse side or reverse side or whatever. Anybody here a numerologist or whatever you call the guys that take care of coins? No. You see these 2 pillars here? They're supposed to represent the pillars of Hercules. And around the pillars of Hercules, they have this ribbon that says, King of Spain and the Indies. Well, the Indies, that was America at that time. They thought they were in the Indies. If you push these 2 pillars together and wrap that little ribbon around them, it makes today's dollar sign. And that comes from an Irish American named Oliver Polak. And Oliver Polak was sending money, Spanish weapons, Spanish clothing to the Americans in the Revolutionary War. He kept track of whether it was pounds or whether it was francs or whether it was the Spanish dollar. And he used the dollar sign for the Spanish dollar, and we use it to this very day. This is where they settled. The big settlements were at Galvez Town, which is where the Bayou Manchac meets the Amite River. They have Valenzuela. That's where Donaldsonville is on the top of Bayou Lafourche. I think we know that place. At Concepcion was later called St. Bernard to honor the great general Bernardo de Galvez. And we have Barataria, which we still call it Barataria today. But you notice that these settlements were chosen not because of the agricultural viability of the place, but because of the strategic location. Concepcion, that's to stop traffic coming in from Lake Barn. You could defend it there. Barataria, people coming on up through Bayou Barataria into New Orleans. The Barataria was there to stop that. Valenzuela at Donaldsonville, that was to cut off traffic, prevent traffic from coming up here. And Galvez Town, right up here was British, and Galvez Town was a border town. This was the border between English territory and Spanish territory. That was until Galvez got in charge of the situation, because when Galvez came in, the first thing he did was he marched an army up to Baton Rouge and took Baton Rouge. By the way, that army was 1st Regiment, Louisiana Regulars, but a large portion of that army were militia. When the Spanish took over Louisiana in 1763, they instituted a very robust militia program where local people were officers of militia and local people were members of the militia. So that you'd have a militia come from a town. The guy that was the colonel of the militia might very well have been the mayor or the biggest landowner in the town. These militia, Galvez joined those with the regular army, and the militia were actually the first ones to do the attack at Fort Butte on the way up to Baton Rouge was mostly Louisiana militia. Baton Rouge was taken because of Galvez's genius at battlefield command. This is how far ahead this guy could see. He knew, first of all, that the British in West Florida and East Florida outnumbered him as far as regular troops go. Outnumbered him 2 to 3 to 1. So what do you do when you're getting ready to go to war and the other side outnumbers you? Yeah, you attack. Doesn't do any good to defend because he's got you. Before he sent his troops and got his militia together to go up to Baton Rouge, he sent news over to Texas. Texas had a cattle drive across Texas to Natchitoches, and then through Natchez, and then across through Valenzuela, Donaldsonville, Vacherie, and he brought those cattle in to feed his army. That's how far ahead he was thinking. He had one, because they controlled the west bank of the Mississippi River, Spain controlled the west bank, he had soldiers from up around St. Louis and one of the settlements up here, Point Coupee. He had those guys come in on the north side of Baton Rouge and cut off any relief coming from anywhere else. So when he took Baton Rouge, he knew they were not getting any relief from anywhere else. And when he did take Baton Rouge, it was pretty amazing how the man did it. This is why Galvez has a statue of him in New Orleans, and that's why they got streets named after him, and that's why there's a city in Texas named after this guy. He brought his militia up, and he told the militia, we're going to go on the east side of the fort, just outside of Cannon Range, and march back and forth and just make a big ruckus and look like a lot of people, like you're setting up to do something. The English moved all their cannons to the east side of the fort. Meanwhile, Galvez brought siege cannons that he brought up the river and then planted them on a hill behind a grove of trees. And then the night of the 20th, he had all his engineers cut down the trees, and on the morning of the 20th, these siege cannons started bombarding the fort, knocked down the walls until the guy, Colonel Dickinson in charge of that fort, looked out and all he saw was cannon because his walls were gone. And so he surrendered. And Galvez says, that's great, you can surrender, but by the way, you're the top dog in all of West Florida, so you got to surrender Natchez too. So he wrote orders to the commander at Natchez to surrender. Galvez got a couple of guys in a pirogue to paddle up the river and delivered the orders and say, here, you're to surrender to us. Guy did it. I mean, it was orders. Orders are orders. This Valenzuela settlement of the Canary Islanders, as you saw in the previous lecture by somebody who knows a lot more about it than I do, they had Canary Islanders settled here and Acadians here. And then another flux of Acadians came in, and then another flux came in, and pretty soon they outnumbered the Spanish settlers about 10 to 1. So what happens when you have something like that? Well, the guys that are Spanish start to learn how to speak French, marry French girls or marry French guys, and that's it. You've got all these Cajuns that can trace their ancestry back to those guys by the caves. Here's some of the uniforms. You can see I'm a sergeant. This guy right here, he's an Irishman. This is how complex the Spanish army was. They had a whole regiment of Irishmen. And officers were Irish, everybody was Irish. Matter of fact, the previous governor of Louisiana was O'Reilly. He was the Spanish governor for Louisiana. You can understand why the Irish would have some resentment against the English. And as much as they drove them out of their land, took their land away from them, made it illegal to be Catholic. And the more they oppressed the Catholic, the more Catholics the Irish became, because that's just human nature. And so a lot of them migrated to France, a lot of them went to Spain, and in Spain they joined the army. We have a free woman of color. They also had Spanish soldiers that were men of color. They didn't just have Spaniards. They had Frenchmen, and they had Germans, and they had free men of color, all belonging to the Spanish army because they recruited locally. So when you say the Spanish army took Baton Rouge, don't think it was a bunch of guys from Spain, though there were a lot of guys involved from Spain. This is what the militia look like? This would be what the Acadians, who happened to be here at the time, which was not the big influx, but they had the first and second Acadians. This is the uniform they wore. It looks a lot like the American Army's uniform, doesn't it? Yeah, there's a reason for that. Spain provided the uniforms for the American Army during the American Revolution, the American Revolutionary War. Even though a lot of them came on French ships, it was Spanish equipment. So any ancestors you may have that are first or second Acadians, the men wore that uniform when they marched with Galvez, or they may have worn this uniform if they joined the Spanish regular army. It was a complex world, even more complex than it is now, and now it's pretty confusing. Here is a very fine painting done by a Spaniard that I have a print of this on my wall. It shows, it's called the March de Galvez. This, of course, is supposed to be the great general himself, and it shows all the different kinds of people that were involved. You have Spanish regulars, you have American regulars, you have militia, you have Indians, you have an American soldier, you have a volunteer straight off the street. You notice that they have the Cross of Burgoyne, which is a Spanish regimental flag, and they had the Stars and Stripes. Yes, Oliver Polak had American soldiers in that march with Galvez. So it was part of a world war, which was the American Revolutionary War was actually when Spain made it a world war. And let's see what we got else. Okay, here's some recommended reading. And I recommend this, one of these is really good. It's The History of Discovery and Conquest of Canary Islands by Juan de Abreu Galindo, as translated by George Glass, 1764. That's when George Glass translated it, but this was a priest who wrote that history sometime before 1764. George Glass, very interesting history with this guy. He was going to scope out places around the Canary Islands where England could set up. He was actually a Scotsman. Where England could set up a little way station because the Spaniards were doing so good with the Canary Islands. And he got captured. So he and his wife and daughter were captured, and they were held in the Canary Islands. And he bided his time while he was there translating this book. It's a very good book. And it's available now with print on demand from Amazon. But he finally convinced the Spanish government to let him go, which he did. And then he got his wife and his daughter and himself, they got on a passenger ship, an English passenger ship, to go to England. On the way there was a mutiny on the ship, and they killed Glass and threw his wife and daughter overboard. They said the mutineers were Portuguese. Why would they have Portuguese sailors on an English ship? I don't know. But they were looking for money that Glass was supposed to have had. So he met with a pretty sad end. Another good work is Guanche Survivors and Their Descendants by Jose Concepcion. That's 1984. These are fairly modern. They're getting better and better books now as the DNA sampling come in, especially with the Rh negative. That was really an amazing revelation. Guanche's Legend and Reality, 2012. And then, of course, Spain, The Forgotten Ally of the Americans, 1976. This is another good book where you find out how much Spain actually contributed to the American Revolution. And in the words of George Washington, we would not have succeeded without Spain. And are there any questions? And I hit it just about on the button, too. Okay, we have any questions? We can put up the house lights. You have a question? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. About Georgios and so about San Marco, he fight war. He beat the devil so early to fight the war. And the second one is my birthday coming.
Oh.
Saint Michael the Archangel, because he's a soldier and a warrior like you.
That's right. That's right. And of course, the patron saint of Spain is St. James. Of course, in Spanish, That's St. Diego. So we hear San Diego. San Diego was, his name was St. James, the killer of Moors. So you can understand what war he was involved in, was the reconquest of Spain, to run the Moors out of Spain and bring Spain back into Christianity, Catholicism, which was only, Christianity was the only Catholicism, Catholicism was the only Christianity of the time. Okay, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Again, what were the three different nationalities that had the heritage?
In the Canary Islands, there were more than three. The original Guanche, I think from reading, were Berbers that came over. There is some history of Rome having visited the Canary Islands. They even had set up a place where they made purple dye, which was the Romans were very fond of purple dye. And I think that was in Lanzarote. I'm not sure. But then, of course, the Spaniards came. But when the Spaniards came, they brought everybody else from Europe along with them. I mean, so you had Irishmen, you had Frenchmen, you even had Englishmen. And Irish were particularly populated the Canary Islands after Henry VIII was so abusive to the Catholics in Ireland. A lot of them left, and Canary Islands was one of the places they found it. But because the Canary Islands were on the way overseas, Spain recruited a lot of the Canary Islanders for their army and for their navy. And Christopher Columbus had a Canary Islander on the ship with him. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your patience.
This is Jason Balello, y'all. Good old Cajun name. Nah, very Italiano. Jason Balello is a native of Thibodeau and a graduate of E.D. White Catholic High in Thibodeau. He holds a bachelor's degree in history and government with a minor in music from Nicholls State University. He's married and his wife's family hails from Houma. Jason loves historical research, and currently is employed as the archival technician for the Diocese of Houma-Thibodeau at their Historical Research Center in Thibodeau. He also serves as the historian and tour manager for the Volumnia Forum on Park Avenue in Houma. He has a great appreciation for history and believes in the need to preserve and market our history and traditions. Jason seeks to constantly be learning new details about old history, especially in the Bayou region. He's performed historical research work with Laurel Valley Plantation in Thibodeau, Ducros Plantation in Schriever, the Regional Military Museum in Houma, and the Nicholls State University Library Archives in Thibodeau. He's a member of the Friends of the E.D. White Historical Site, the Lafourche Heritage Society, and the Terrebonne Genealogical Society. He can also proudly report that he's an Eagle Scout. So he's going to be speaking to us with the topic Robert Ruffin Barrow in Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana. And of course, we're here on Barrow Street. So it is right down the parking lot from us. So let's welcome Jason Balello.
Thank you. Hello, my presentation is on the Barrow family of Terrebonne Parish. My name is Jason Balello, and I am the historian and tour manager for the property. Robert Ruffin Barrow, also known as R.R. Barrow, was born in 1798 in North Carolina. He died in 1875 in New Orleans. He's buried in Magnolia Cemetery in Houma. He was married to Volumnia Washington Hunley. She was born in 1825 in Tennessee. She died in 1868 in New Orleans. She's also buried in Magnolia Cemetery in Houma. Her brother was Horace Hunley, the first designer of the first submarine used during the Civil War. Their children were Volumnia Roberta Barrow, born in 1854, and Robert Ruffin Barrow, Jr., born in 1858. The documents, or the letters, his nickname was Ruffy. Barrow was the owner of 16 plantations in 3 Louisiana parishes, plus large land holdings in Montague County, Texas. He was a sugar planter, canal builder, steamboat owner. He invested in promoting construction of the first known submarines. He was one of the wealthiest men in Louisiana. His property in 1858 was valued in excess of $2 million, including hundreds of slaves, freemen of color, and local Cajuns working on his multiple plantations and other projects. In 1828, Barrow purchased property in Terrebonne Parish from Jim Bowie of Bowie Knife and Alamo fame. The property became known as Residence Plantation since it became Barrow's place of residence in Terrebonne Parish. The farming operations on Residence Plantation eventually became Volumnia Farm, named after Barrow's wife. After the war, Barrow became destitute, but his children were able to inherit what was left of his property and either sold or donated to help settle debts, and eventually Roberta inherited Residence. This is a picture of the original Residence Plantation home that was built in 1840s and eventually torn down in the 1890s. The current home was built in 1898 by Roberta at the same site on Park Avenue in Houma. It is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Along with Residence Plantation, Barrow also had Myrtle Grove, Roberta Grove, and Honduras plantations, including sawmills and refineries. Barrow and his descendants also donated large amounts of land, money, and supplies to meet various community and social needs. Donations of land and money for many churches of various faiths in the Terrebonne Parish area. Donations of land and houses to widows with children, and donations of money for social and community organizations and groups. He donated the land to the Archdiocese of New Orleans, and the church would become the first Catholic church in the parish. This is a picture of St. Francis de Sales Catholic Church in Houma. He also donated land and either money and materials to churches such as New Zion Baptist Church on Grand Caillou Road in Houma, St. Matthew's Episcopal Church on Barrow Street in Houma, the First United Methodist Church of Houma, and in 1857, Barrow donated land on Barrow Street between School and Vret to the First Presbyterian Church. He also donated land and either money and materials to Residence Baptist Church in Mechanicville, which is right across from the farm today, and St. Patrick's Catholic Church in Gibson. And on May 6, 1873, Barrow donated land valued at $5,000 to the African Methodist Church for church and burial grounds on Barrow Street in Houma. Barrow also donated 3 arpents of land on August 3, 1858 to the Houma Academy. This was the first African-American school in Terrebonne Parish. Records show that Barrow donated parcels of land that were valued at $300 each to widows of friends and workers, both white and black. The donations took place in the years 1854 to 1873. After the abolishment of slavery, Barrow gave his workers the land and houses that they lived in on near Residence Plantation. The area became known as Barrowtown and is today known as Mechanicville. He also gave them enough money to travel and purchase land in Liberia if they wanted to return to Africa. Clara Slatter Gadry, daughter of Roberta Barrow and William Slatter, who married Wilson Gadry Sr., inherited Residence in 1901. She raised 200 chickens on Volumnia Farm and kept the money from the produce. Wilson Gadry I was the son of a general store owner named Adolph Gadry. He had 60 milking cows, and the sugarcane paid the taxes for the property. Thus began Residence Dairy. This is a picture of one of the drivers at Residence Dairy. We've got a number of pictures of various workers that worked for the property on our website. Wilson J. Gadry II with his wife Lily Lee McKnight and their son Wilson J. Gadry III. He inherited Residence and Volumnia in 1954. In the 1950s, big out-of-state milk companies pushed all the small dairy businesses out of the market. Eventually, in 1966, Volumnia Farm took all its female dairy cattle and purchased beef cattle and switched to beef production, mainly breeding, which continues through today. Volumnia Farm is still in operation as possibly the oldest continually family-operated business in Terrebonne Parish. Today's owners continue the business of cattle farming and have also begun opening the property and home to tours and promoting historical research of the area. This is Mr. Gadry with his wife, Miss Wanda. His family is one of the friendliest families I've ever met in Houma. Barrow used carrier pigeons to communicate between his various properties for business. This is the old aviary before Hurricane Ida destroyed most of it, but we have plans on restoring it as well as other projects on the property. After we finish restoring this, we'll probably work on the blacksmith shop. The Robert Ruffin Barrow tree is one of 26 live oak trees on the property registered with the Live Oak Society. This is how the house looked before Hurricane Ida. If people are interested to see some of the pictures after the storm, you can check out our website. We update it pretty regularly with pictures and what's going on. In 2021, residents opened for tours and work is ongoing to restore our antiques and buildings damaged by Hurricane Ida. Despite coronavirus and Hurricane Ida, the residents' home and residence area on Volumnia Farm are open for booking tours and sharing its history and connection to Terrebonne Parish and its people. Thank you. Feel free to grab a brochure, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask me.
Now's the time to ask.
The brochures are out in the hallway. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a question asker, so here I go again. I find it really interesting that I guess it was Old Man Barrow who even before the Civil War established this school or church for these enslaved people, right?
Yes, ma'am. In fact, we have a record that he freed one of the slaves on his wife's family plantation and brought him down to be the pastor of one of the churches.
I think it's interesting. He has so many enslaved people, but he does this before the Civil War.
Right.
Anybody know what's going on with him?
We also do have record books of how much the workers were paid, and some of the black workers were paid more than the white workers. They were paid based on experience, not so much the color of their skin.
He's kind of an anomaly, isn't
He is. Ms. Margie Scopey can tell you more stories about him than I can. Yes, ma'am.
Louder.
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. I actually did some research on for transportation a few months ago, and if you go to the Nichols Archives, they've got reels on the early jury meetings, and it. Right. Barrow actually worked on worked on it, the canal, with his workers. He ended up passing away, and his son ended up finishing the projects.
He actually wanted it to be the intercoastal.
Right.
But anyway, it's an interesting story. When I worked at the courthouse in Homeland, I found his will, and it was a very interesting read. Because for some reason or other, he got very angry with his wife and his lawyers. And he was adding clauses to his will, telling them that they were ruffians and scoundrels, and they're stealing from him, and he needs to
You're going to have to show me the source and give me a copy of that. Thank you. Anybody else?
Jason, so the property now, they just raise cattle?
They mostly breed, the cattle, about, I want to say 300 head of cattle. We breed them on the property, and we get about 150 calves a year. And he separates the bulls from the rest of the females, and they breed them a certain type of year. And then there's a certain calf season, and they'll either auction them off, or a person that is into the beef production will purchase the calves.
How many acres is that?
I think he has the cows on about 1,000 acres, I want to say. So, large property.
Where is the plantation to?
It's on East Park. But I've got brochures with maps on the back if anybody's interested. Anybody else?
Anybody else? Thank you, Jason. I'm so proud. I feel like I'm mama. I'm giving him tips on public speaking. He's learning the ropes. He's an excellent researcher, and he does private research. For those who haven't seen Residence Plantation yet, it is quite something to visit. I grew up across the bayou, actually, from Residence Plantation. My great-grandfather was an overseer on, we think, Roberta Grove. But I had never been to the plantation. Saw it all the time, but didn't know what it was, really. And Jason did an excellent job on the tour that he gave me. They have some fabulous things to see in the plantation. My favorite part, of course, was the aviary, because I was fascinated with the idea of using carrier pigeons to do business from one business to the other in Terrebonne Parish. Like, okay, he had a lot of businesses. There was no such thing as email. It was a tweet, yeah. Oh, Jay. Oh, that was pretty good. I like that one. That's one for the record books, Jay. You did good. For those of you who don't know, Jay Shakespeare there is the president of the German Acadian Coast Historical Society, and is also the manager of Laura Plantation, which is a Creole plantation in Vacherie, St. James Parish, which also is a fabulous place to visit. And we're also thrilled to see Mr. Richard Bourgeois from Ducros Plantation is also here today. And they've been doing a lot of work at Ducros as well. So there's a rich history in all of these large land holdings. Some of it is, of course, not always that we want to discuss, but it's there, it's history, and we need to talk about it. But there's a lot of good, there's a lot of things we need to learn. The aviary thing still just blows my mind. But they also have, in residence, they have a beautiful dining room table that's made from the bottom of a cistern. It took the big round bottom of a big cistern and made a dining room table, and it's lovely. And the china was buried in the yard during the Civil War and was dug up afterwards, and they have the china. There's a lot to see and learn, and it was a great experience. You have to make an appointment, but it's well worth it anytime you get to learn about history.
And the tour leader is very knowledgeable and excellent at giving the tour.
And he doesn't get as nervous when it's one or two people. We're going to work on him with large groups, but he's getting there, you know. We do have, I do know that, Beth, I was very interested, Beth Plaisance, to your question about Robert Ruff and Barrow's will. I want to look at that too. That's fascinating. That would be great for the lifelines, to put that in Terrebonne Lifeline. So you need to talk to Wanda Fitchmore in the back about getting a copy of that will to Wanda. She's raising her hand back there, yeah, give her that. We do have one of my lines in my ancestry. Robert Ruff and Barrow, there was a woman who would have been my great aunt, or two greats or three greats aunts, anyhow. Two great, yep. And Louise Whitney, married to Tidance James Simpson. Her husband somehow disappeared. We don't know what happened to him. We think he was murdered. And she lived with her brother and his family, and he was murdered by some Daspit people. Yeah, we know that. The newspaper that we found in Napoleonville says, he was shot outside the home of the Daspits and died shortly thereafter. They ignore what is clearly a murder. There was a long-standing hatred between the two families. Go figure. You pretty much figured that one. They've been filing charges. Anyhow, that's a long story. But once her brother was murdered, then Louise Simpson and her children were left on the street, and Robert Ruff and Barrow donated her a house and property on Barrow Street here in Houma, where they lived until one night it burned down to the ground with her and the kids in it. They managed to escape with the clothes on their backs and immediately moved to New Iberia. So, interesting stories. So I love the skeletons in the closet. Some people don't, but I certainly do. So our next presentation is Miss Margie Scobie. For those who don't know, Margie held part one of the People and Culture presentations on Thursday night, and I've asked her to do a quick presentation here for us today. Margie is the founder and executive director of the Finding Our Roots African American Museum, which is, she's going to have to give you the address, but she does a lot of research on African American research, and I really encourage people to do research forwards and backwards. History goes backwards with our ancestors. We need to make up for lost time when records were not properly protected and shared. But we also need to write down our records of today so our descendants going forward into the future have access to who we are. And we're going to do a little presentation later this afternoon called Who Are You?, which is about ancestors and descendants and protecting our heritage. And so Margie's going to give us a quick overview on the African American Museum here and what people can do in research. So Ms. Margie Scobie.
Good afternoon. Thank you guys for having me. I am Margie Scobie. I'm president, founder, and curator, just as Patty said. I am excited to be here. And how many of you guys was here on Thursday? Oh, I was hoping everybody raised their hand. That way I could say, okay, I'm done. Y'all know what happened. All right, with that being said, first of all, I want to say something that you guys are familiar with. How y'all doing, Sha? And secondly, I would like to say, Mimi Nisi Ote Ya Babazantu. I am the voice of my ancestors. I am the president and founder, just as Patty said again, of that museum. One of the things that I do here, and that is research many families, whether it's my family or whomever, because many times you have to start from the beginning to get to where you need to be. And so I do research. I've researched Robert Ruffin Barrow, Cage, Butler, you name it, I've done that. And the reason being is because I was told many years ago that I came from Africa, or my descendants, my family came from Africa. And the one thing Mama said is that you have to remember, you have to know these stories. You have to remember that who you are and where you came. And so with her telling me that you are a descendant of the prince, clearly I'm thinking, okay, what prince? You know, she don't tell me all the details, but just that I need to listen. And so with that being said, she said, you have to start out in St. Mary Parish. And I'm thinking, they don't have a castle in St. Mary Parish. I'm thinking all Prince and, you know, those royal people came from, you know, out of those large castles. And so finally got a chance to go back on that and researched it. And true enough, I am the descendant of Prince Abdul Rahman Sori. And so Patty and I actually got together one year, I don't remember what year it was, and we actually got one of my descendants to come here, and he did a presentation, and he's from Africa. He's now in Chicago. He taught at the University of Chicago, but since then we keep in touch, and of course we are getting together, the family, so we can actually take a trip to go back and visit Africa. And the other thing is I have researched the other side of the family and found out that they came in on the slave ship Wanderer, and that was one of the exhibits that we did at the museum, and of course it was mentioned in the Smithsonian magazine. And other than that, we research. We do other things. And by the way, y'all, I met a new friend. And it's so good to meet new people because then you learn a lot of things about them. Miss Dale Ann Bro, she and I met today. And I mean, just her family names, I know a lot about the Bros from my area. And so it's always good to know who you are, know where you came. And I understand that you guys take pride in knowing that you came from Nova Scotia and all these different places. And truly, truly, I do take pride in knowing that I am a descendant of Africa. I am so, so proud of that. I told that. I walked that. And matter of fact, I had an interview with Martin Foss, and one of the things that he said, Margie, you know, you're so adamant about that. And I told him, look, if you see footprints of charcoal, that's me, because I am proud to be an African American. I'm very proud of that. And so I'm glad to be here today, and I thank you, Patty. Now, the museum, we are located at 918 Roussel Street. We did suffer some damages from the hurricane, so it's not open yet. So we don't know what's going to happen in the near future. hopefully, we can get up and running real soon. So if anybody have any questions, anybody need research done, and we do have an African American genealogy group here at Terrebonne. So if you all have any questions, need research done, because sometimes you have to dap into my history just as I have to go into yours. I mean, when they talk about Barrow, they talk about Slatter. Slatter actually had a son, and he was a black guy, or mulatto, and he sent him back to Africa because he wanted to go back. But again, he wrote a letter, and he told his dad that he wanted to come back here. And Slatter sent $3, and he actually went to Africa to retrieve that child. But that was a black child that was, fathered through Slatter, Robert Ruffin Barrow, son-in-law. So anything else? Anybody want to know anything? And then for that school that was built back in 1857, yes, Robert Ruffin Barrow did build that school. It was located on the corner of Point Street and Barrow Street. Anybody familiar with that area? There's a bank there now, Regions Bank, in that area. They call it the St. Francis de Sales Boys Schools. That was the Homer Academy. And many of those plantation owners built schools for their slaves or enslaved people, only because they were doing what they needed. They needed to be educated. And on Thursday, many of the guys that was here that introduced themselves as doctors, they actually attended the Homer Academy and went on from that school to Leland. So yes, that school was built long before slavery ended.
I find that so interesting because, we just don't know our history. And everything you hear is that enslaved people couldn't be taught to read or write, we couldn't educate them, and it was against the law, which we knew it was. But so many of these people who were held into bondage, they did exactly that.
Well, actually, everything that been created when it comes to education, it came out of Africa. So African taught the Romans, the Greeks, and then they went out and they taught. So everything, they didn't have to teach the Africans anything. They knew everything they needed to know. It's just that the way they wanted it done may have been in a different form, but they knew everything. Anybody have any questions?
Not a question, Margie, but for everyone who doesn't, I've heard it, but would you explain who the prince is?
The prince, he was captured by a guy by the name of Foster. Anybody familiar with the Foster family? Mike Foster, he was the governor of Louisiana. That family, Thomas Foster, once lived in Mississippi, and he actually made it out to Algiers, and he purchased some slaves. And so that happened to be one of my great-time six-grandfather. He purchased them, and he brought them to Mississippi. He stayed there for more than 30 years. And, of course, when Thomas Foster wrote his will, the other children, they ended up here in St. Mary Parish. But the prince was allowed to go back because he was of a Moor descent. And according to the laws and the treaties that were signed, you could not enslave a Moor on the shores of America. And so that's why he had an opportunity to make it back home, and that he did. And, of course, he summons America for his children. His father actually sent gold. Now, we're still looking for that gold, but they sent gold here to free these children, and of course, that never happened. But since then, the family and I have finally got back together, and so we had an opportunity to meet with the elders of the village by phone, by email, what you call it, by tweets. But yeah, we've been doing a lot of that lately, and actually, my cousin, she was invited to the Queen's funeral, and they only invite children of royal, or people of royal descent or what have you. They get special privilege to do that. And so she actually called and said, listen, I've been invited, are you coming? I'm like, no, they didn't send me the letter. So, and finally got my first piece of mail about a month ago, and actually I was told from the elders of the village that I must use my title, and I really don't, because I didn't know. I really didn't know I needed to. I mean, Margie it felt good to say Margie. But again, I did get a letter and said that you must use your title, so I am Princess Margie Scobie. Thank you.
And what's the name of the movie about the prince?
It's called Prince Among Slaves. And that was a documentary that was done by a guy named Bill Duke. Anybody familiar with Bill Duke? He did the movie called The Predator. Well, Bill Duke, he actually produced that piece. They're from Futa Jalan, the present-day Mali.
So interesting story how it was discovered, in that he kept telling everybody he was a prince until the
Yes,
perfect day.
yes, and yes, he tried his best to get it through to Foster that he was the prince, but of course Foster ignored that. Actually, he realized the talent that he had and the ability for him to do so much that he actually put him in charge of a lot of things on his plantation. And so he finally met with the guy that he knew in Africa. This guy actually came out to Africa, and he fell ill, and the prince's family actually assisted him. And then he remembered this guy. He went to the marketplace to sell some sweet potatoes.
In Natchez.
Yes. And he managed to see Cox. Cox had a patch on his eye, and he recognized Cox, and Cox walked up and said, "Don't I know you? You're a prince. You shouldn't be here." And so then Prince, he went back to Foster and said, "You are holding a prince. It's against the law of the land." And Foster held to his word that he wouldn't release this prince. But of course, he got in touch with a guy that was a newspaper editor, and he got with this guy, and he gave a letter, and the letter got back home to King Sori. And that's how they was able to retrieve him. Anybody else have any questions?
What was the story of how he was enslaved? How he ended up coming across?
How did he become a slave?
They captured him. They were at war. They had a war going on in Africa, and something happened with the soldiers, and they captured him, and they put him on a slave ship. Yeah. Go ahead.
How long before he was captured did he get back home?
40 years. 40. And he didn't make it back. He made it to Liberia, and that's where he died of pneumonia. Yeah. So, anybody have anything else? All right. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.